Welcome everybody to Pursuit of Happiness CIC's vaccine discussion, and it's just to get your stories of your experience of when you've had the vaccine, if you've had both vaccines, and just to get an insight really on how it's been for you and what made you want to get the vaccine as well. Because there's a lot of stigma obviously behind the vaccines, but what encouraged you to get the vaccine as well? So yeah, that'll be good. Okay, shall we move on to Anita?
Hello, hi.
Hi, Anita.
Hi. Well, I've had both jabs, and I had. Oh, my brain's gone blank now. That's a good start, isn't it? I've got the one I had now, but anyway, I've had both jabs. Even though I do understand that people have apprehension, yeah, and I do understand that, and I think as a community, as a society, we need to acknowledge the fact that people have anxiety. I think there's also an element of trust and rationale needs to be put in place. And I understand it went very quickly with regards to creating the vaccine, which actually that's what everyone wanted. When we were at the worst point, I don't remember anyone saying, I hope the vaccine comes along in 2 years. So I know that everyone was kind of wishing that it came as soon as possible, because the idea of having many years of this apprehension and fear with regards to this virus is something that nobody wanted. Even if you haven't opted for to take the vaccine, I don't remember anyone saying, I hope they take 2 years to develop it. I really don't. And I think I understand apprehension, but you have to have an element of faith and belief. And also, it's not the first virus that has happened in the world. And I don't remember the other viruses. Once a vaccine was created, I did some research and I didn't really find much negative feedback with regards to side effects or long-term side effects with the other viruses such as SARS and Ebola and things like that. So, but when I did read up about the other viruses that happened, and countries and the world really had to get on top and try to deal with them. When you look at the impact that these viruses had on the different parts of the world it affected and how many people lost their lives and whatever, and it was resolved in the end through things like vaccines. That alone, for me personally, meant that I had to have trust in the vaccine, because I didn't want. I wanted to stop the virus as soon as possible. And when I did research, it looked like those were the type of things that stopped the viruses in other parts of the world. I know some of the other viruses were more contagious, or some of them, the side effects or the rate of death was a lot higher. But I just felt that, I feel uncomfortable, but I have to trust that the world is taking on the vaccine, and we've had other countries in the world which have been affected, and I don't remember hearing, or I couldn't find any regrets from them taking the vaccine as soon as it was offered. So that was really my main convincing factor on what's happened previously. But also, as part of what I do, I do community work, and I do face-to-face work on some of my projects. And I've personally felt that I couldn't comfortably put myself in a space where I'm supporting vulnerable people and there is a possibility or high possibility that I'm highly contagious. I know it doesn't mean that, even though I've had the vaccine, doesn't mean that I can't, spread it. But the vaccine does reduce the impact within the community. I mean, I don't fully understand it, but I know it's better to have it if you're around loads of people than not to have it and you work with loads of people. And if you work with vulnerable people, I felt it was responsible for me to ensure that I am the best that I can be to provide a good service to someone, and also to minimize my effect on them in any way. So my health is important to provide and support vulnerable people. I mean, that's really it. Well, that's all I can think of, really. I mean, I know I did fall sick in the first virus, and for the first vaccine, and I was quite poorly for about a week. The second vaccine I had no side effects at all. But you know, I also had COVID as well. And COVID was a lot worse than the vaccine. So I would pick the vaccine any time over COVID. Definitely, because at one point I thought I had to go into hospital because I couldn't breathe. So definitely I think the vaccine's a better option than getting COVID.
Okay, great stuff, Anita. Thank you very much for your insight into taking the vaccine. Okay, and shall we move on to Mark and your story?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, when the vaccines first came around, I can remember the news stories that were going across the networks. There were still people in hospitals, there were still ventilators pumping, and the close-up pictures of people barely being able to breathe. And I definitely didn't want to be in that position, because it wasn't just a generation that was in the 80s that was in those hospital wards. It was across the age range, including 20-something-year-olds. But at that point, I was still hearing a lot of the stories that friends were circulating on the social media platforms. So, you know, the Pete Sheeple statement and it's a pandemic, all of those sort of statements. And I'm not an early adopter of anything. I'd rather wait till the second generation of something comes out than the first generation of it. But then my family members started having the vaccine. So my daughter had the vaccine because she works for the NHS. And apart from a sore arm, she had no side effects. My sister then had the vaccine, and same again, no side effects. And my mum had the vaccine and no side effects. And I think I was probably taking my vaccine a week or two after they'd all had their second vaccines. The scary thing was I was still nervous walking in. I'm not going to lie. I was having all of those repeated viral emails and WhatsApp messages going through my head as I stood in the queue to go into the building. But when I got inside, it was well organized. You know, you had a very efficient machine telling you where you needed to be. All of the information that my GP would be accessing was available to them, and I trust my GP. I think if you can't trust the GP that you turn to in your times of need when you're really sick, and you walk into that surgery asking for help, if they're the ones who are telling you that you should take the vaccine because it's in your best interest, I think you should listen to them. In my experience, it's the first vaccine I've had a choice over whether I take it as an adult. My parents would have made the choice for previous ones, but when you see all of the negative headlines and the negative press, not just outside in the media. I mean, literally in Huddersfield, we've had people who passed away from COVID, and I don't mean died with COVID. I mean as a result of COVID. But those stories never get broadcast as widely as the viral anti-vaxxers. So I guess what I really want to say is that having had both jabs, I've had no side effects, and I think it's in everyone's best interest to take the vaccine. When you look at the numbers of people who are in hospital still to this day, and we're talking in July now, the higher proportion of people who are in hospitals are the ones who haven't had any vaccines at all, not first jab or the second jab. There's no way that I want to be watching a headline where my family members or myself, literally, is one of the news stories that's in the headlines with non-vaccine patients clogging up the NHS, and I'm afraid what we'll probably end up seeing. The fact that there's less Black people taking it as well than any other ethnic background is probably again because we distrust the medical professionals because of historic things like the Tuskegee experiments that had happened. But I think Reverend Brown mentioned it earlier, everybody else is taking the same vaccines that we're being asked to take. There is a time before the pandemic where you would have had to pay for vaccines to go on holiday. They would have charged you for that service. And while they're offering it for free of charge, at the same time as they're offering it to the Queen and the royal family and the politicians, I think we've got an obligation to look out for ourselves as well as the friends and family that we've got around us. The last thing I'd say is it was painless. Again, I'm just repeating myself. It was painless. I haven't grown a second head. I haven't got 3 eyes. That there's nothing that I could say that was negative about my experience of taking it. And the long-term benefits that you get from knowing that even if you haven't had COVID, the chances of you contracting COVID and having a less worse outcome because you've had the both jabs has got to be worth just the defense mechanism that they're offering to you. It's a win-win. It's a no-brainer. Take the vaccine if you're offered it.
Yeah, that's your peace of mind, I suppose, isn't it? Knowing that you've had both vaccines now and you've got that sort of cushion, I suppose. That's what it could be, isn't it? A cushion, knowing that you won't get it. If you do happen to contract COVID, then the chances are that you won't end up in hospital, you won't struggle to breathe, you won't be at risk of dying, and that's the bottom line, isn't it? Because of how it's affected everybody across the world. It's a global thing. It's not an isolated pandemic. It's a global pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've got a family member that passed away from COVID, Kenneth Henry. He was at a good age, no doubt about that, but he could have lived a lot longer had he had the vaccine. So I think a lot of people, if they'd had the close experience of a loved one or a family member that had gone through the COVID process, I think they would be less likely to be anti-vaxxers. It tends to be people who've not had a close experience of COVID who are probably the loudest advocates of not taking the vaccine in the first place.
Yeah, I totally get that. Definitely. I think it's when it hits home and it's close to home, isn't it? That puts like the fear in people then, and could be a whole different story then, couldn't it?